All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll call everybody to order. Sorry, we're a couple minutes behind schedule, but that's no problem. Welcome to our briefing today, Igniting Innovation, Progress and a Path Forward for Wildfire Policy. I'm Dan Brissett. I'm the president of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. And we are super excited to present this briefing today. And we couldn't have done it without our friends at the Federation of American Scientists. So thank you for your partnership and initiative in organizing our panel today. I'd also like to say thanks to Senator Alex Padilla and his great staff for help with the room today as well. EESI was founded by a bipartisan group of members of Congress, and since 1984, we have worked to provide information about environmental, energy, and climate change topics to policymakers and the public. We do our best to ensure that our resources are always timely, relevant, accessible, and practical. We put a lot of thought into making sure that these resources are always science-based and ready for when congressional staff need the information. What does congressional education look like? Well, it looks a lot like this. We do lots and lots of briefings. Just last week, we were over on the House side covering the Sustainable Energy in America Factbook. All of our briefings are online. You can visit us online at eesi.org. You can download all of the presentation materials, other resources. You can find us on YouTube at EESI Online and see videos of all of our briefings. We do a lot of them. We have briefings coming up one next week about energy efficiency and the power of energy efficiency to help lower utility bills for households and small businesses. We also have briefings coming together on climate and weather data, water infrastructure, as well as some cool fact sheets about climate jobs and critical minerals. We also just kicked off season 11 of our podcast, The Climate Conversation, just last week. And that's especially relevant to our discussion today because we talked to Genevieve Biggs. Genevieve oversees the Wildfire Resilience Initiative at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And we talked about how ecologically beneficial fires can reduce the risk of extreme and life and property threatening wildfire. Check it out. It's a really good listen and not too long. The best way to follow all of our work is to subscribe to our biweekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions. And you can find everything, like I said, online at eesi.org. Next up, we'll put this up at the end of the briefing as well in case you change your minds. But if you'd like to share any feedback about our briefing today, please do. It only takes 2-ish minutes to fill out our survey. We read every response, and it really does help us. We have a tremendous panel. And we will be live streaming everything on social media at EESI Online. We'll be doing real-time coverage on Blue Sky and Instagram. We have a great in-person audience. We'll have quiet time for Q&A at the end. We also have an online audience today, and we'll be taking questions from you all online. If you send us an email, the email address to use is ask, that's ASK, at eesi.org. And if you can stick with us after 4:30 or so, we're going to be having a reception to network and talk all about policies to improve our wildfire resilience. Thanks to Federation of American Scientists and Megafire for organizing that portion of our event today. Now, this briefing was originally scheduled for January 27th, but Mother Nature had some other thoughts and dumped snow and sleet on DC and several other states with even more snow and destructive freezing rain and ice. That was Winter Storm Fern. I mentioned that because we just did a briefing about winter storm resilience and how you can make the energy grid more resilient to winter weather impacts. And we all just lived through that. That briefing was just a little while ago. We scheduled this briefing because a little more than 1 year ago, we dealt with the catastrophic wildfires that blazed through Southern California. And all across the country, communities are experiencing more intense, destructive, and difficult to control wildfires. Hotter and drier weather, decades of fire over-suppression has built up flammable materials, and human developments in and around fire-prone areas have transformed wildfire into a major threat. Wildfires cost us up to $424 billion annually and displace tens of thousands of people fleeing the flames. And that's not even to mention the animals. So, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to kick us off with our first speaker today. Jessica Blackband is a senior manager with the Climate and Energy Environment team at the Federation of American Scientists. Jessica leads FAS's lands and water programs, which focuses on fostering evidence-based stewardship of natural resources. Before FAS, she worked at Tetra Tech, where she supported various EPA programs. She served as an analyst at the Government Accountability Office and a communications specialist at the South Carolina Climate Adaptation Science Center. Jessica, welcome to the briefing today. Thanks for being such a great partner, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to everyone in the room for joining us today, for your interest, and hello to those of you online. So glad you could join us as well. As Dan mentioned, my name is Jessica Blackband, and I'm a senior manager at the Federation of American Scientists, or FAS for short, where I've helped to lead FAS's wildfire program for the last several years. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Climate and Environment team on which I sit. I'd also like to thank EESI for their partnership in bringing this briefing to life, and our wonderful panelists for being here today. So excited to hear from you all in just a few minutes. So for those of you who haven't heard of FAS, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're based here in Washington, D.C., and we were founded 80 years ago, we've been around for a while, by scientists behind the Manhattan Project. And our founders were motivated by an obligation to ensure that science and technology are harnessed for the public good. And that's an ethos that still motivates our work today. Our climate and environment team recognizes that shared prosperity depends on a healthy environment. And also, as Dan mentioned, we work to ensure that all Americans benefit from healthy ecosystems, and we do that through fostering evidence-based stewardship of natural resources. So you might be wondering, why does an organization that got started focusing on nuclear weapons issues now work on wildfire? Well, first, because the magnitude and scale of the problem is becoming existential. Wildfires are becoming more frequent, more severe, and more costly. Many of us know that wildfires have played a key role in ecosystem health for many millions of years. And for thousands of years, indigenous peoples across the world and on the North American continent have managed fire to steward both natural and cultural resources. But for nearly a century, our public policy and land management has focused very heavily on putting out wildfires. This fire suppression has resulted in forests that burn intensely when the fire does strike. At the same time, more people than ever are living in landscapes that evolved in step with fire. We built homes, communities, power lines, and infrastructure in areas that are vulnerable to wildfire damage. And on top of it all, an unstable and unpredictable climate is driving extreme fire behavior that even our best models struggle to predict. The consequences of all of these factors when taken together are dire, because the direct costs to human and ecological communities of wildfires are growing. The federal government spends more than $1 billion every year since 2011 on wildfire suppression alone, and the long-term costs imposed on people and places is much higher. A little more than a year ago, the most expensive wildfire in U.S. history devastated communities in Los Angeles, and impacts ripple through communities for many years, long after the front page headlines recede. For example, survivors of the 2023 wildfires on Maui are still reckoning with the consequences of the deadliest wildfire in 100 years. In fact, it took more than 2 years to move debris from those fires to a permanent disposal site. That process was completed just a few months ago. Events like those on Maui and in LA are projected to become a new normal if we don't act, and act soon. If you or your constituents or people you know haven't already been impacted by the flames of a fire themselves, you've likely experienced a wildfire smoke day. I remember several of them in the last few years here in Washington, D.C. Even short-term exposure to wildfire smoke can be very damaging to human health, and it can make going outside dangerous really for everyone, but especially for people with underlying conditions like asthma, for children, and for the elderly. Wildfires can also impact human health in other ways, such as by degrading water quality and impacting soil health. So a lot of challenges, but one of the other reasons FAS works on wildfire is because we know that how we govern science, data, and technology will play a huge role in determining whether we achieve wildfire resilience. And crucially, wildfire itself is part of the solution. Our panelists will have a lot more to say on that in just a few minutes. The good news is there's no shortage of ideas about how to build a more fire-resilient future. From vegetation management, improved early detection, upgraded building codes, and other community-based interventions, we have many of the tools we need to create a future where we can safely coexist with wildfire. The challenge before us now is primarily one of whether governments and communities will respond and whether they will do so proactively enough. The federal government can play a critical role in fostering effective and proactive solutions. But it's really important to remember that there are no panaceas and there are no silver bullets here. And that's because every community and every ecosystem is different and has a unique relationship with wildfire. Where I went to school in Leon County, Florida, it was really normal to see charred ground from prescribed burns when I was out on a hike. And I learned a lot about how fire is a fundamental natural force that the longleaf pine ecosystems there need to survive and to thrive. In Western forests, where federal land ownership is more ubiquitous, Prescribed fire application, getting more fire on the ground, faces a unique set of challenges. And surprisingly, when we think about fire, we often think about forests, which makes sense. There's certainly a connection there. But in fact, some of the most damaging fires of the last several decades haven't happened in forests at all. In fact, most of the property damage we've seen from wildfires in the last few decades happened adjacent to grassland and shrubland ecosystems. I say all this to emphasize that as we co-create solutions, we have to ensure that those solutions are informed by the needs of communities at risk and by the unique relationships of different ecosystems to wildfire. We also must recognize that wildfire management is highly interdisciplinary, and we have to design solutions that will have benefits for other issues as well: water quality, soil health, wildlife, and many others. So again, delighted that you've all joined us today. Great to see so much interest and enthusiasm on this topic. Please consider FAS as a resource moving forward. We can help you understand the complex policy landscape, support evidence-based policymaking, connect you with our in-house experts, and connect you with wildfire experts external to FAS. And so with that, I'm delighted to pass it back to my colleague who will introduce our panelists, each of whom will explore solutions to the crisis. Together, they bring decades of experience working to build a more fire-resilient nation from space, from the sky, from the fire line, and from the law office. So with that, I'll pass it back over.
Brownie points for whoever remembers to take their name card back with them. I often forget. And here's the clicker, by the way. All right. Thank you, Jessica, for getting us off to a great start. And that brings us to our next presenter today, Kelly Martin. Kelly is the Wildland Fire Advisor for Megafire Action, lending her on-the-ground expertise to inform public policy at all stages of fire. With 35 years of federal wildland firefighting experience, she served in the U.S. Forest Service and National Park Service across 6 states. Kelly is the co-founder and past president of Grassroots Wildland Firefighters and was appointed as the primary lead to represent wildland firefighters on the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. She remains deeply engaged in the field as an active fire practitioner, mentor, and coach with the Nature Conservancy, and serves as an instructor and mentor in both national and international women in fire training exchange programs. Kelly, it's been so nice to get to know you today. I'm really, really looking forward to your presentation. Turn it over to you.
Okay. I think I got to figure out how to get my PowerPoint up. Yes? Oh, next? Okay. All right. Thank you for that introduction. I really want to thank FAS and EESI for hosting this panel discussion, and all of you in the room today. Your presence speaks volumes for how important this work is. Over the course of my 35-year career, I have dedicated most of my professional life to being a federal employee for both the Forest Service and the National Park Service. I've been working on Type 1 incident management teams and operations and fire behavior prediction and forecasting. During my final 14 years as the Chief of Fire and Aviation at Yosemite National Park, I considered it a privilege to lead what I regard as the capstone assignment of my career, overseeing and implementing the beneficial use of fire across the park and with our partners, the U.S. Forest Service, and with local government partners. Upon my retirement in 2019, I continue to feel a strong sense of gratitude, along with a commitment to return my knowledge and expertise to the public and government officials who are demanding enhanced understanding of the complexities surrounding wildland fire. With that, I thank you for providing me the opportunity to contribute to this important dialogue today. On January 7th, 2025, like many of you, I was glued to the media reports regarding the unfolding events in LA. The scale of devastation was incomprehensible to me, as entire communities, thousands of homes and businesses, and numerous lives lost in a single day. The tug to understand how this happened was profound for me. I had to go to LA to witness this firsthand. As it turns out, our little Whitebird volunteer fire department, by the way, Whitebird is only like 100 people, so coming to DC is quite novel for me. As it turns out, our department was one of the smallest departments responding to LA, among hundreds of other departments that rose to the occasion to be deployed to LA from the United States. And this was through what was called the California Emergency Management Assistance Compact that we were able to go. So our group here, only five engines, 1 task force out of 5. So we sent 25 engines from Idaho to LA. Upon our arrival in LA, following the subsidence of 100-mile-an-hour Santa Ana winds, we assessed the aftermath of a significant urban conflagration. What began as a wildfire in the densely vegetated hills above Pacific Palisades, and that's where we were assigned, was Pacific Palisades, even though there was the Eaton fire that was also going on at the same time, was rapidly advancing downhill, flowing through drainages and ravines, through continuous aged brush, eventually breaching the wildland urban interface boundary and initiating the Los Angeles conflagration. And this notable fire continued to burn with hurricane-force winds until it ultimately halted at the Pacific Ocean, having exhausted all available structures. I think this was one of the most shocking things that I saw, was how in the world does a wildfire start way up on the hill, come through these communities, cross the Pacific Coastal Highway, and actually impact all these buildings along the coast. I could not understand that until I actually got down there and started witnessing this for myself. So what I am also a bit interested in investigation. So trying to understand, trying to put this together over the course of 3 weeks of our deployment in Southern California, I had to try to put this together in a way that I could make sense out of, so I could come back and explain this to folks like yourself in this room. And the best way I could do this was to take photos and really assess what I was seeing. And so the first piece, I actually have 4 slides that I want to present to you in a way that I hope makes sense, and in a way that you can feel empowered to know that everyday average Americans throughout the United States can also take action in this same sort of way. But home hardening is absolutely the responsibility of the homeowner in order to do the work that needs to be done in order to protect your own home from these threats of a wildfire. These are buildings that we saw along the way, and when you look at why is one building still standing and the other one next to it burned down, you begin to see that the difference of building material, the siding material. The first house on the upper left was a new construction. It had mostly stucco siding, no eaves for fire to actually come up underneath the roof line, but you can see that the shrubs did burn and impacted the side of the house, but did not burn the house. The upper right also shows pockmarks from a very high fire intensity fire, because the building, the home next to it, actually burned to the ground. But it remained standing, and it was a retrofitted home within a community where almost every other house burned down. The one on the lower left, you can start to see the pockmarks on the stucco siding. It was hot enough to really pop that siding. But what really became interesting to me was watching the windows that actually survived the intense heat. And so these dual pane windows, if the first pane breaks, the second pane can also provide that buffer so that embers and flames don't enter the house. And when they enter the house, it's almost next to impossible to put that structure fire out. So this is yet another way, from a home hardening perspective, where we saw that a lot of these houses survived. The second part of this, the first part is home hardening. The second part of this is the defensible space. And you're hearing a lot in California and other areas called Zone 0, which also really encourages the homeowner to take action to limit the extremely volatile vegetation around a home. And so when you see this and you see a house that was built out of rock and stone, you're like, how in the world does that kind of structure actually burn? likely what happened in that particular photo, and again, I can't tell you that these are the things that actually happened, but just knowing fire behavior for the last 35 years, these are the things that I'm coming up with, is that the window probably broke, and with that kind of hurricane force winds, moves through the house, catches all the plastic material on fire inside the house, and the house is lost. A lot of people use AstroTurf in California as well. Probably some of you do as well. But that also catches fire. And you can see where this caught fire and creeped up towards the house. Another kind of indication that this could have, in fact, started the home ignition in either vegetation or a wooden deck. The bottom left is one of my favorites because a lot of people love their privacy hedges in California. They're on small lots, and they've been spending decades manicuring these privacy hedges because everybody wants their own private Idaho, no pun intended. That's where I'm from. And so, but this contributes significantly to the ember production in a conflagration environment. And so to try to get homeowners to think differently and create this mindset to remove a privacy hedge is next to impossible to do. But it's worth starting this conversation about what are the alternatives, because this is going to be a very, very difficult bridge for people to make. And then the last one is the connective volatile wood structures that then burn all the way up into the house and begin the ignition of a house. The third phase of thinking about wildland fire and fire in a community is our community preparedness. I only got 1 minute, So this is where it takes all of us as a community. So a private homeowner, defensible space, now you have to move into the community and make the community strong and resilient and robust when it comes to defensible space. And last but not least is moving out even further into the watershed and into the WUI in terms of fuel treatment, hazardous fuels reduction, prescribed burning, chipping, and you'll hear more about the Fix Our Forest Act and what it means to actually start removing some of the excess vegetation off the land to reduce the threat to communities. So with that, I'm going to close with just a really quick opportunity to say our current trajectory is increasing the fire deficit. We can't just keep suppressing fires and think we're going to get out of this, and we can't just think of timber harvesting as getting us back on track either. More and more community development is expanding into high fire hazard areas. We have insufficient safe contemporary suppression strategies, and we need to think about equalizing funding, policy, and incentives for creating the will and the desire for both individual, community, and agency effort to really make a difference. So in the long run, what we want to do is redirect the National Wildfire Strategy from one of a pattern of destruction and rebuilding to one of being able to live with fire and creating resilient watersheds on our landscape. Thanks very much.
I noticed, Kelly, I noticed. Thanks, that was an awesome, yes, brownie points. That was an awesome presentation. Thank you so much. Kelly has some great slides. Those slides are available on our website, eesi.org. If you want to go back and revisit any of Kelly's presentation or our upcoming presentations, you can go to YouTube and check out the video. We'll also have summary notes in a couple weeks as well, so you can check all of this great stuff out. And Kelly covered a lot of ground, and we're going to cover even more. If you have questions, we'll have a Q&A. If you're in our online audience, you can send us a question to the email address that's ask@eesi.org. Next up is Annie Schmidt. Annie has worked on wildfire response, resilient landscapes, and fire-adapted communities for over 20 years. She started as the staff co-lead for the congressionally chartered Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. Her past experience includes management of a community-based wildfire resilience organization, as well as development of the Wildland Fire Strategic Plan and a legislatively mandated report on wildfire for Washington State. Annie previously served as the Director of Policy and Partnership for the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, where she supported communities working toward wildfire resilience across the nation. Annie, Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks for having me. It's nice to see so many familiar faces in this room, and so I appreciate folks coming out today. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what Kelly started talking about, this issue of conflagration, right? And so when we talk about conflagration, what we're talking about is fundamentally something that is a little bit unusual when we think about wildfire. When we think about wildfire, often we think about trees burning. In an urban conflagration, what we have is houses burning. The houses become the fuel. You have one house that starts on fire, you have a second house that starts on fire that produces more and more embers, that overwhelms our suppression response. And then we have a disaster sequence that is initiated that can be extremely hard to stop. So LA brought this fire into focus, this type of fire into focus nationally. But conflagrations are not new. These photos that look, in many cases, a lot like LA are not LA. What you see on the screen are photos from Gatlinburg, Tennessee in 2016, the Alameda fire in Oregon in 2020, the Lahaina fire in 2023, and the Tubbs fire in 2017. I could have picked a dozen more. These are fires that are geographically dispersed that all share something in common. They are conflagrations where we've had fires burning into the built environment. Fire burns things that will burn. Houses will burn. We know this, and there's historical context for conflagrations. We've seen these before. You can't be a school child in the United States and not hear about Mrs. O'Leary's cow and some of the things that happened in the Great Chicago Fire, in the fires that we saw in Boston. London had this happen, right? And we changed our patterns of behavior after those types of conflagrations. We saw zoning come into play. We saw building regulations come into play. We saw fire suppression evolve and change, right? But these events, fundamentally not new. But we are seeing significant and increasing impacts, right? The proportion of buildings that are exposed to wildfire that were ultimately destroyed more than tripled since 2002, right? We're seeing the destruction rates increase, and we're seeing that in all vegetation types. Jessica highlighted that, right? This isn't just a forest problem. This is a fire problem. It's a community problem. It's a grassland problem. It's a public health problem. It's an emergency management problem. It's not just a forest problem. So the conditions that we're seeing are exacerbating these impacts. Kelly highlighted this as well with the hurricane force winds, right? We're seeing fires that are wind-driven, that are extremely fast-moving, and where a lot of that initial damage, that disaster sequence, is initiated rapidly after ignition. Oftentimes, you see the most destruction in the first 12 to 24 hours after ignition. When my community in North Central Washington was exposed to fire in 2015, it was a small fire, Sleepy Hollow fire, and ultimately about 30 homes were lost, 3 commercial warehouses about a mile and a half from the home loss. Embers lofted, destroyed significant fruit packing infrastructure. And that damage occurred in an operational period that saw every available resource from our valley on that fire. There was nothing but the aircraft rescue at the regional airport left to send, right? These types of conflagration events initiate in such a way that even if you are LA and not a small community in North Central Washington, your suppression resources are overwhelmed. So what do we do about that? If we can't suppress our way out of it, what are our options? Well, if we start to look at what home damage is driven by, we see a bunch of things start to play into this. Kelly did a great job talking about structure composition and why it matters. But it's also the surrounding vegetation. It's also how close are you to your neighbors, right? Is the house next door 30 feet away? Is it 5 feet away? If it catches on fire, your risk is different, right? It's the position on the landscape. It's what that fire looks like. It's how fast the wind is blowing, right? And not all of those things are in the direct control of the building owner. Some are, but not all of them are. And personal soapbox, information deficit is not the problem. We can yell about risk all we want all day long. People who live in fire-prone ecosystems usually know. They know that they live in a fire-prone ecosystem. And if they didn't know it now, they'll know it this summer when they're smelling the smoke, when they're seeing the flames, where they're seeing the coverage, right? This is a problem that some of these communities in the West have been dealing with for a long time. And in fact, fire is a natural part of the ecological process in many of these places. So we can scream about risk, but really we have to start talking about how we fix this problem in a value-based way, right? Like, what does it take for all of us together to start to fix this problem? Insurance is something that we hear often as a potential carrot or stick in this equation, right? How do we start to make sure that we're tackling this collective action problem of wildfire in a way that enables us to have available, affordable, and reliable insurance? We actually have an explainer on our website, which folks are welcome to check out. It's linked here on the slide, where we actually talked with Milliman, an insurance actuarial firm, to sort of examine the problem of insurance. What is really driving a wildfire insurance, and what can we start to do about it? Because again, not all of these factors are in the homeowner's control. So this becomes a problem that is shared. I share it with my neighbor. We share it as a community. We share it with our state. We share it with our county, and we share it as a nation. Other solutions includes things like the Fix Our Forests Act, right? FOFA, which is the acronym commonly used for Fix Our Forests, is one option. It creates a community wildfire risk reduction program, getting at the collective action conflagration problem. How do we start to work as a community across agencies in an interagency way, taking the resources that we have, sharing them, collaborating more effectively, and starting to approach this in a way that tackles that home hardening that Kelly talked about. The Community Wildfire Defense Grants Program inside of FOFA, that's extended to include home hardening. Right now, it doesn't. So one of the best tools we have, one of the accessible tools for communities, doesn't tackle the composition of the building. And Kelly's slide highlighted a lot of the compositional challenges with roofs and siding and all of that. We need to start supporting communities as they start to cover those things. Fire intelligence, I will say, we're going to talk about tech, so I'm not going to steal Michael's thunder on this, but simply say that fire intelligence, the kind of information we get that works for both the built environment and the wildland fire environment, those things matter. And more work will still be needed, right? These aren't simple problems. It's taken decades and centuries to get into the situation that we're in, and more work is absolutely going to be required. That means modeling in the built environment in a more effective way. How fire spreads structure to structure, how wind influences those patterns, where we're likely to see structures exposed. Those are emerging and developing places for our modeling, and we need to do a little bit more there. Water availability continues to be a point of conversation in many states across the West. What kind of ecological process supports more water availability matters, and also public health, right? Smoke canceled a lot of soccer games for my son this last fall. It was unfun for him and for everyone else, right? And so we need to start tackling this in a more holistic way. And that brings me, I'm almost done, I promise, to one of my later slides, which is that this, again, is about more than land management. It's about more than the built environment. It's about more than traditional partners. I see Loma Katsi in the room today, so shout out to the folks from Loma Katsi doing some great work, kind of at the nexus of some of these issues, right? With our workforce, our landscape, with the built environment, with the communities writ large, right? The mitigation and recovery workforce also matters. And we need, from your perspective, cross-cutting solutions. A lot of times, one of the things that hamstrings our efforts with related to wildfire is that we have to talk to 17 committees, right? Wildfire matters for ENR, it matters for Ag, it matters in HISGAC, it matters in the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, right? These are cross-cutting issues, science and commerce. I could keep going. And all of those solutions are ultimately going to be necessary to get to the kinds of outcomes we need. FOFA advances the work that we're doing, and we are excited to see those solutions moving forward, but there will need to be more work that follows. There's more that we can do. And finally, it's just not a binary choice, right? It's not fix the forests and deal with our landscapes or deal with our built environment. This is doing multiple things at the same time. We can have these kinds of solutions, and ultimately we do need them. So there's my contact information. You have it in your slides, and I'm really excited to be here.
All right, Kelly 1, Annie 0. No, just kidding. It's a little game we play. All right, Sara, you're up next. Sara Clark is our next panelist, and Sara is an attorney specializing in land trusts and natural resource conservations, the California Environmental Quality Act and the National Environmental Protection Act. I can't speak today, sorry about that. Tribal law, litigation, and appeals. Sara advises fire collaboratives by developing reports and strategic plans, providing subject matter expertise, and advancing policy solutions to help cultural fire practitioners and prescribed fire advocates put more good fire on the ground. Sara, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. So as was said, I am Sara Clark. I work predominantly on beneficial fire, and so I'm going to be serving as a little bit of a transition here, not talking about the built environment, not talking about home hardening, predominantly talking about forests, grasslands, and other wild ecosystems. This isn't the PowerPoint, I won't go through it, but my background started doing a lot of work helping to implement beneficial fire projects and largely moved into the policy space about 5 years ago. So why beneficial fire? I'm from California. I'm going to give you a lot of California-specific examples, but this is not a California-only problem, and a lot of these concepts apply across the West and actually across the United States more broadly. So the map on the left side that you'll look at is called a fire return interval departure map for California. And what it shows is basically we take information about how much fire occurred on the landscape, how frequently. So it could be once every 5 years, once every 10 years, once every 30 years. And then we look at how far departed we are from that naturally recurring interval. And you'll see on the map that the areas in blue and green are places where we have seen not enough fire, where we are in a fire deficit that is sometimes on the orders of hundreds, decades to hundreds of years. California was a place that used to burn frequently. We had lightning-ignited wildfires, but we also had a lot of indigenous burning. Scientific estimates show that between 4.5 to 6 million acres burned annually. For any of those that were paying attention in 2020 when we had our worst modern wildfire season, we burned 1. And so the reports when settlers came to California was that it was pretty smoky. And it was pretty smoky on a regular basis, and that is how our ecosystems evolved. And so when we think about returning to a place of wildfire resilience, particularly again in our wildland ecosystems, we are talking about a place that needs fire. Mechanical thinning certainly has its place and can be served as a fire surrogate to help reduce fuels, but mechanical thinning alone will not get us to a place of ecosystem resilience. And that's in particular because a lot of the places that you see in blue are really steep, really inaccessible, and that we will not be able to get the equipment needed to do mechanical thinning into those areas. Fire is the only option to return resiliency to those places. And so that's when the concept of beneficial fire comes in. And so I've spent a lot of work in my law practice trying to help folks return beneficial fire to the ground. And that really takes 3 flavors. So prescribed fire is probably what most of you all are familiar with. So when you get a lot of federal agencies, a lot of state agencies wearing their very official looking outfits, Kelly has many of them, to go out with engine crews and hose lines and drip torches and to put fire on the ground in a very methodical way. And that can have a lot of different reasons to do so, but most often it's to restore wildfire resiliency and reduce fire risk. Those kinds of programs are governed by state and federal law. On the other hand is the concept of cultural burning. Cultural burning is a practice that indigenous people have used across North America since time immemorial. And tribes engage in cultural burning for a huge host of benefits, maybe for flushing out game or returning meadow ecosystems. It might be to cultivate a particular plant that's important for basket weaving or for engaging in medicinal practices or cultural ceremonial practices. Cultural burning, as many tribes conceive of it, is a practice that should be governed by indigenous knowledge and tribal law. We have many, I'll talk a little bit more about how that can be quite complicated in our fragmented jurisdictional setting today. And then finally, the place that we often don't talk about, but is actually quite important, is the concept of wildfire managed for resource benefit. We have, as I said, we need to be getting back to numbers that are in the millions of acres a year. When we're talking about planned beneficial fire of the cultural and prescribed fire variety, it is very hard to see how we get to that number. Instead, what we need to be doing is making sure that our wildfires are working the way that nature intended and that we are selecting for wildfires that are doing good work. Right now, we are selecting for a lot of wildfires that are doing the worst possible thing on the landscape. We suppress everything that's good, and we don't suppress the things we can't suppress, and those are the ones that really burn the ecosystems at a high severity level and cause a lot of problems. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the ways in which Congress and other state legislatures and other advocacy groups can work to actually increase the pace and scale of beneficial fire. And I'm going to talk in particular about 3 topics. So first, as a lawyer, I have to start on liability concerns because that's what everyone turns to me with. But studies have shown that liability concerns are the #1 reason why people are afraid to engage in beneficial fire, the #1 questions that I get when talking to all of you. And so I wanted to start there. So of course, liability concerns are, if I put fire on the ground and something goes wrong, what happens? Do I lose my house? Do I lose my job? Do I lose my nest egg that I've worked towards savings? And those are very real questions that we have to get. But I need to start with the key concept that prescribed fire, for the most part, is incredibly safe. Numerous studies have shown that less than 1% of fires escape, and when they do, an even smaller percentage of those cause damage. But this is one of those problems that is a very low probability, high risk scenario. We all know about the types of catastrophes that make headlines, where we see, Calf Canyon's Hermit's Peak kind of fires, where we end up with millions, if not billions of dollars in damage. And so we have to think about how to addressing liability in that context where almost everything works, but when it doesn't, it is devastating. And so some of the ideas that have come up are, I want to talk about 3 of them. So first of all, at the state level, California, Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, Texas, and Oklahoma all now have prescribed fire claims funds of some kind. So at a state level, what the states are doing is putting money towards making this a problem that the states bear as a whole, as opposed to individuals. So by setting up a claims fund and offering it as a state-backed insurance pool, prescribed fire practitioners can engage with fire and know that if something goes wrong, the public as a whole has their back, as opposed to them individually. Federal government could be more involved in this and helping to backstop that, or to create incentives for states that set those up. Second is, what's the liability standard? How do we address liability in this context? And here, the federal government also has a role. A number of things that practitioners should be worried about are, if the Forest Service comes and suppresses your fire, are you going to get a bill for the Forest Service for their services, or is that something that the federal government is going to cover? Likewise, if you have a prescribed fire that goes awry and burns down in an adjacent area of public lands, are you going to get in trouble for the natural resources damages that you might have called, even though that fire might have actually done good work? Finally, in this context is the application of the Federal Tort Claims Act. As you all are aware, the federal government has been asking contractors to do more and more work on public lands. It is a big model right now to bring in local communities, nonprofit organizations, small businesses, et cetera. When those cooperators come onto public lands to do this work right now, they're asked to bring their own insurance and their own risk. Instead of treating it like a public service that they are doing in the service of our public lands, we're asking them to risk their livelihoods. And so modifying that Federal Tort Claims Act coverage is a really important key piece here. Okay, Next, talking about cultural burning. So as I alluded to, cultural burning is something that tribes really would like to engage in as a sovereign entity. And that includes on lands not only that they hold in trust, but also on adjacent ancestral lands that they have had a connection to since time immemorial. Our legal systems are not well suited for this at the moment. On trust lands, we have infringement by, infringement might be a big word, but we have the BIA providing oversight on those activities in a way that often prevents cultural burning and prescribed fire from being done in a timely fashion. And then on lands that are administered by federal agencies, we don't have good systems right now to actually enable tribes to do cultural burning as they know how on those federal lands. Those federal agencies want to come in and impose red card requirements and engine requirements and burn plan requirements that are really anathema to tribal partners. And so thinking about how we can have these entities work together in a way that respects tribal sovereignty is really critical. California, I'm proud to say, has been working on this in a sovereign-to-sovereign agreement structure enabled by a law called SB 310 that came into effect 2 years ago. And we've had multiple tribes now enter into agreements with the state government to do the cultural burning work that is so critical to improving the safety of homes and communities. Finally, I went to law school to do environmental work, and I studied the importance of the Clean Air Act and NEPA and Endangered Species Act as sort of the cornerstones for how we protect our public lands in particular. And I have been completely radicalized by the wildfire seasons, because what has happened is, in the context of beneficial fire, I have had so many projects that I have worked on through permitting where we have waited and waited and waited and waited to get the permitting done, because we have to do so many surveys, we have to consult with so many different entities, we have to do public comment and public review, all for practices that science says critical to getting onto the landscape. And does that environmental review make these projects better? Maybe marginally, but it does not do it in a comprehensive way. And so some of the work that needs to be done right now is really thinking about how our bedrock environmental laws support the use of beneficial fire so that we can get more of this good fire on the ground without selecting for the wildfires that are really catastrophic. So thank you so much for your time. Really looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Sarah. That was an awesome presentation. As a reminder, after our final presentation and our Q&A, we're going to have a reception in this room, so I hope you'll have a chance to join us for that. Thanks to Federation of American Scientists and Megafire for that. We also will have Q&A, like I just mentioned, and if you want to go back and revisit any of these slides, including the one Sarah's just presented, they're all online. There are also printouts on the front table outside the room, too, if you want to have a paper copy as well. That brings us to Dr. Michael Falkowski. Michael is the lead scientist at the Earth-Fire Alliance, providing strategic vision and oversight for research and scientific initiatives. Michael guides the development of a robust research to operations framework as Earth-Fire Alliance expands programming from its flagship FireSat constellation, satellite constellation, I suppose, to introduce new initiatives that drive long-term change and local action. Previously, Michael worked at NASA headquarters, serving as program manager for the Wildland Fire Program and leading the FireSense project. Michael, thanks for joining us today. Over to you.
Great, thank you. See if I can get this part right. All right. Well, it's great to be here this afternoon. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm excited to be here today to talk a little bit about what we are doing at Earth-Fire Alliance. Sorry, am I on the right slide here? I am not. To help address our nation's wildfire crisis, and specifically dive into how our organization is working together across institutional boundaries to help transition cutting-edge technology into fire management operations to help promote wildfire resilience. As you saw in some of the previous talks, and as evidenced by the increasing frequency of devastating fires like the Marshall Fire in Colorado, the Lahaina Fire in Hawaii, and the LA fires, the fire situation in our country is changing, it's changed dramatically over the past several decades. We are also at the same time seeing profound leap forward in technology that can be used to aid in wildfire response and mitigation. However, the adoption of these technologies and advances into operational fire management has not kept pace with the growing problem. Based upon the observations I've made over my career, this is largely because there is a disconnect between the operational fire management agencies and the technology innovators. There are also significant barriers to effective collaboration on both sides that must be overcome to define and execute the art of the possible. Our organization, the Earth Fire Alliance, was formed specifically to help address and bridge this gap. EFA is a community-led global nonprofit coalition that is dedicated to collecting and delivering transformative real-time information for fires across the globe to the communities that need it when they need it. Our mission is to comprehensively observe wildfires across the planet, serve communities worldwide with this timely and trustworthy information, and conserve ecosystems, communities, public health, and economies by using these data to inform wildfire mitigation, response, and resilience strategy. We believe that these high-fidelity, accessible data will transform our relationship with fire and ultimately enable more effective fire response and wildland fire mitigation. So with generous support from philanthropies and our industry partners, EFA established FireSat as our flagship program. It is a satellite system built specifically for the escalating wildfire crisis, and it's been developed in collaboration with hundreds of firefighters and fire scientists around the globe who directly shared their desired requirements for such a system. At EFA, we are embracing radical collaboration, and our efforts truly embody the concept of an alliance. We believe in aligning collective efforts for a common global good rather than working within traditional silos. The escalating wildfire crisis will not be solved by any one technology, organization, or nation alone. EFA is cooperating across philanthropies, industry, and government agencies, and directly engaging firefighters and fire scientists to achieve our mission. The team at EFA is itself a microcosm of this ecosystem, with experts that collectively bring hundreds of years of experience from across the wildfire management, space technology, industry, government, and philanthropic sectors. Building on the strengths of these individuals, we are taking action today by collaboratively advancing and transferring useful data to decision makers and scientists in the wildfire management space. With this commitment to rapid collaboration and rapid action, EFA and our partners can quickly design, build, and deploy new solutions urgently needed by federal, state, and local fire management response organizations. As an example of this, our first satellite called Protoflight was built by our industry partners at Muon Space and launched into orbit just 1 year after the founding of our organization. By comparison, government satellite programs typically require significantly more time to formulate, gather momentum, and fund. The ability to rapidly innovate and deploy fire management relevant technology is a key strength of our effective collaboration with our industry partners and our operational fire management partners. The Protoflight instrument, which you see here on the left, was successfully launched into orbit in March of 2025. It's a fully functional system that we're using for on-orbit testing and demonstration, which allows us to reduce risk and validate the end-to-end performance of the satellite system, including its advanced sensors and data delivery pipeline, prior to launching our next 3 satellites this summer. This is one of the first fires that was detected by the Protoflight satellite. It's a really small, relatively cool roadside fire in Oregon that was started by someone dragging trailer chains behind their vehicle on the highway. This particular fire never got to be more than a half acre in size and was too small to be detected by other satellite systems that are currently in orbit. This example demonstrates how FireSat will have superior sensitivity and breakthrough capability to detect fires in their earliest stages before they grow into major threats. Here's another look at that fire, and on the left you can see just how small that fire was in the Alert West camera, and then also the local media photo here where you have the firefighters responding to this roadside grass fire. So this again showcases our ability to catch fires when they're small and catch them before they may grow into a threat and move into an adjacent community. Here's a very broad overview of the FireSat system and its capabilities. When fully operational, we will be able to quickly identify and track fires as small as 5 by 5 meters with a 20-minute revisit rate across the globe. This is an unprecedented capability to detect and track wildfires as compared to existing systems. Our data system architecture allows for low latency data delivery to first responders, along with storage and distribution of long-term data sets to the fire science and modeling communities. Collectively, this system will help optimize first responders' fire response approaches and resource allocation throughout the life cycle of any given fire, and it will also deliver a world-class data set for scientific applications, including AI-based predictive modeling, and ultimately support the development of improved wildfire resilience and mitigation strategies. Here's another example of a fire that Protoflight detected this past summer. These are nighttime images of a fire in British Columbia that are spaced about 24 hours apart. On the top row, we have a series of images from the midwave infrared channel, which captures areas of the fire that are burning at a moderate intensity. They're identified in bright yellow there. And the bottom row, there's a series of images from the long-wave IR channel that measures the hottest, most intensely burning portions of the fire, which can be seen in those brightest orange colors. Another thing you can see in this image is that throughout the time series, a cloud bank rolls in and likely drops rain over the fire. And so you can also see, especially in the long wave channel and a little bit in the midwave, you can see a reduction in fire intensity, either due to rain falling on the fire or attenuation by the clouds that moved in. Oops. Here's another example. This is another fire from Canada from June this year. On the top image, you can see the midwave IR channel, where you can see the active fire in those yellow greenish colors on the right. And on the bottom two images, you can see our mid-infrared channel and then a false color composite, where you can see the active fire on the right, and then a burn scar from 5 years ago from a fire that burned in that area 5 years prior. So this example showcases how the FireSat data will be useful for many applications beyond just fire detection and tracking, and will help with burn severity mapping and post-fire ecosystem recovery mapping. I think this is my last example of a fire. This is the Dragon Bravo fire that burned on the north rim of the Grand Canyon this past summer. This is a multi-band view of that fire. In the false color composite on the top, you can see, hold on a second. You can see the unburned vegetation showing up in green, and then you see the burned area in the black and purple colors. And you can notice if you look in the lower left corner of the burned area, you can see mixes of purple and green, indicating that the fire burned at a lower severity, and so there was likely less damage to the ecosystem. In the middle image is our mid-infrared channel, and you can see the moderately intensely burning areas of the fire, as well as in the hottest parts of the fire showing up in the brightest yellow spots on the north, the top of the long-wave infrared bottom image on the bottom. So together, these images illustrate how FireSat delivers complete wildfire intelligence, everything from pre-fire ecosystem conditions to active fire dynamics and burn severity, which we can deliver to wildfire science and wildfire managers in one integrated view. And we also believe and understand that in order to be useful, data needs to be delivered to everyone in an equitable way, and we are meeting users where they're at by providing key data products which will be easy to use and do not require sophisticated infrastructure or analytics capabilities. This includes data sets depicting fire perimeter and fire progression, as well as fire intensity. And we're also developing a system to deliver fire hotspots alerts to first responders' mobile devices to improve situational awareness and wildfire response. We have set a very ambitious timeline to meet our goals, and we're moving very fast. We were founded in 2024 with an ambitious plan to have near real-time fire data across the globe within 5 years. I mentioned that Protoflight was launched in March, just 1 year after our founding, and we have our next 3 satellites launching this summer. Our goal is to have a fully operational constellation by 2030, providing 20-minute revisit rate globally. We have generous support from philanthropies to de-risk and demonstrate this technology, and are always looking for more partners and opportunities including from governments across the globe, to accelerate implementation and sustain operations into the future. We are a nonprofit with a unique business model that combines philanthropic funding and private sector innovation to kickstart rapid, first-of-its-kind technology for public good. While it's not practical or not possible for most governments or agencies to launch a satellite constellation like FireSat for their individual use, collectively, every agency and country can benefit from our global program, which provides significant economies of scales. We also understand that we cannot solve this problem alone, and we have no intention in doing so. As an alliance, we are embracing radical collaboration, recognizing that fast change requires leveraging the best of what the public sector, private sector, and non-governmental organizations have to offer. We are an example of how barriers can be broken down across sectors and silos to address critical technology needs in wildfire management and resilience through radical collaboration. Thank you for your attention. Happy to answer questions during the social.
Excellent. Thank you all to our wonderful panelists for bringing us different perspectives on the wildfire crisis and how we can tackle it. I'm going to move us now into the Q&A. I'll start us off with an initial question for all 4 of our panelists, and then I'll go ahead and open it up to the room. So take a few minutes to be thinking about your question. So to kick off the panel, or to kick off the Q&A rather, the federal government has a lot of different roles in wildfire resilience. As Annie highlighted, lots of congressional committees are involved in many federal agencies as well. Our panelists have either worked directly with a federal agency or have collaborated with them on this issue of wildfire resilience. So panelists, can you tell us a little bit more about how the federal government can support wildfire resilience and where the federal government is best positioned to lead on the issue? I'll start with you, Kelly.
I think from my perspective, I look at it in terms of how can the federal government lead on this? We have a tremendous track record with resources that can be allocated at a moment's notice, coordinated through the National Interagency Fire Center. Wherever there's the activity, I do believe that we have one of the best response, organizations, in the world. When it comes to leading in wildland fire. What I would like to see is an equitable distribution, though, of the resources and allocation to suppression, equally balanced to the response to putting good fire back on the land. We know that that's needed, as well as removing dead and dying vegetation and over-dense stocked stands. So the federal government, I do believe, is in a good position to help assist states with that as well in the long run. So,
great, thank you. Annie?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. So I think there's a couple of things that the federal government can do. If you want to look short term, we know that there's legislation that's out there. I talked a little bit about Fix Our Forests. That's already passed the House. It came out of the Agricultural Committee in the Senate on a bipartisan vote. That's an option to move some things forward. In my introduction, it was mentioned that I was one of the staff co-leads for the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, on which Kelly served. That commission came up with 167 recommendations for ways to improve our wildfire mitigation and management system. 1/3 of those recommendations, in whole or in part, are contained within FOFA. 1/3. That is a significant amount of work and ground that we can cover. Longer term, I'm with Kelly. We need to be looking at how we invest in mitigation. Fire is expensive. And the only way that we start to bend that curve to spend less on response and on recovery is to spend more upfront, to be more proactive, to be looking at active forest management, to be looking at use of fire, to be looking at how we work in communities before the fire starts, to start to really change our trajectory, because otherwise we're going to continue to pay for this problem, whether we're paying for suppression or we're paying for the significant recovery and cleanup costs like those we're seeing in LA.
I'll keep building on that theme. So especially in the beneficial fire realm, obviously the federal government owns and manages many of the landscapes that are in dire need of additional good fire. And so really thinking about what the federal government's role is in encouraging the use of that active stewardship on those lands, I would highlight, in my perspective, I think there's at least 4 things that are necessary for that to happen, for the increase to happen at a scale that's meaningful. One, we need staff, and we know that we have had really significant cuts to staff. Unless there are boots on the ground, this work cannot be done. And so really thinking critically about what the federal staffing levels need to be at land management agencies, I think is incredibly important. Second, we need funding. Much of this work can be offset through, timber revenue and commercial thinning revenue where that makes sense and where you have a plan that doesn't just lead to logging and nothing else, but where it's the first step in a thoughtful stewardship package. But it will need more funding than that. Logging is not going to pay for everything that needs to be done. And in order to create the kind of ecosystem around it, that funding needs to be long-term and it needs to be sustainable so people can actually think this is a career I could get into and stay in. Third, we need to change our culture. I mean, so much of what happens at these agencies is Congress gives tools and then they're not used. And it is very frustrating to see an increased amount of tools when they're just like, well, you had that one and that one didn't work, so we're going to try another one. So much of this comes back to thinking about what makes culture. I would say in particular, my experience of working with the Forest Service, it's an agency that continues to be driven by board feet as their predominant metric, not by thinking about acres restored, acres returned to resilience as their mission. If that was what was driving promotions and driving culture change, that would make a meaningful difference. And then finally, a lot of the red tape that we see around environmental review is really important to think about in a thoughtful way, in a way that preserves the core of those laws to make sure that we're actually looking to promote environmental benefits on our landscapes while making sure that work can be done quickly. Finally, if we're looking at a model where federal public lands are going to be managed by local communities, by tribes, by contractors, which I am fully in favor of, especially in the devolution to local control, we have to be thinking about ways to make those contracting processes easier so that it's something that can be done quickly, it's something that has stability, it's something that respects tribal sovereignty. And without those pieces in place, we won't see the levels of contracting that would actually make meaningful stewardship.
Yeah, I can add a couple of things, and really pulling on something that Kelly said. The federal government is really good at managing land, and they're really good at managing fire. I think the statistic is something like 85% of wildland fires get managed and put out according to plan. It's a very few fires that get away, and those are the ones that can cause the big problems. The federal government has a ton of expertise in land management, ecology, technology, all of those things, and so they still have a role to play there. There's also, on the other side, external to government, tons of organizations, technological expertise and solutions that exist. As I think it was Annie said, that it's not a data problem, it's not a technology problem, it's a transition problem, it's a coordination problem. And so really, I see the federal government's role as coming together to help organize around what are some of those solutions and help guide not only internal to government solutions, but also the external, the industry, the nonprofits, to really help us produce something that is ultimately useful and going to easily integrate with their management systems and their protocols.
Great, thank you all. Now we'll open it up to folks in the audience. My colleague Daniel over there has a microphone. If you'd like to raise your hand, he can find you and let you ask your question. Yes, in the back.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for this very informative presentations. Just wondering, it seems that these the home hardening materials were brought up a number of times and they seem to be quite effective. I was just wondering how common these materials are used. It seems despite their effectiveness, they're not commonly installed either by the homeowners not knowing about them or they're not being prevalent in the area. So wondering what are some of the barriers to installing these home hardening materials and if they are commonly suggested or installed in the areas that need them.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So when we're talking about things that make homes more resistant to ignition, we're talking about Class A fire-rated roofs. So that's your asphalt shingles, that's your cementous siding. So moving away from wood to things that are more ignition resistant. That's double pane windows, which Kelly highlighted. Those are things like enclosed eaves and soffits. Those are screened venting so that you're reducing basically all of the little nooks and crannies where a wind-blown ember can get into the home and start to catch something on fire. So those are not uncommon materials. They exist all across the United States. Venting can be a little hard to find, the low profile metal vents. They're more predominant in places like California, but certainly the roofing materials are available nationwide, the siding materials available nationwide. One of the primary barriers here, though, is cost. These retrofits can be expensive. Roofs in particular are expensive to replace, and yet they confer some significant benefits when we're looking at the difference in ignition potential between a house with a wood shake shingled roof and a house that has a Class A fire rated roof. That's some of the biggest bang for your buck that you can get. And so cost is a barrier for a lot of people in places doing this work. Sometimes the other barrier on ignition resistance and home hardening is there's not a lot of available programs that cover that work. So we do have support for landowners and homeowners right now through a number of different federal programs, but the BRIC program has been difficult to access. That's a FEMA program. There was a GAO report done that indicated that fractional percentages of the money spent on that program go to wildfire resilience projects because it's so difficult to access. The Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program is a great program, more accessible. Communities are using it across the nation to great effect. And it doesn't cover home hardening. So there are some programmatic barriers that get in the way there that could be addressed. But largely communicating one-on-one with landowners and homeowners and folks that are on the ground there, that's the best way to have these conversations. And that also is pretty time and labor intensive.
Any other panelists want to add to that? Yeah.
I'm just going to make 2 recommendations. If you have a Lowe's or Home Depot in your community, see if you can help convince them to create an aisle just dedicated to home hardening materials. The second would be to create incentives at a state or federal government level that includes tax deduction up to $2,000, showing receipts, during your tax season that you spent $2,000 and include that as tax deductible. So we have to really incentivize home hardening.
Great. Next question. You in the front?
Hi there. Thank you all so much. Sara, you mentioned the green tape, cutting the green tape initiative in California, and some of the issues that we're seeing with environmental permitting and review processes. To what degree do you think those obstacles are caused by the laws and permitting processes themselves versus staffing shortages?
Really good question. I think it's a bit of both. So I would say that it's not only staffing shortages where we, in particular, have delays getting folks that are good at biological assessments, good at archaeological surveys. Those can be 2 of the biggest time sucks in the environmental review process. But it is also the delay that happens because of concerns about litigation in those contexts where folks really feel like they have to have a bulletproof document, even if there's a very low risk that the property or that the project is going to be litigated. Those all create delays, but there is delay inherent in the existence of some of these reviews to begin with. And what I would posit when I think about this topic in particular is I think environmental review is really critical where a project has the potential to have environmental harm, but so many beneficial fire projects are designed in a way that is not going to have harm in the first place. And so we're designing a project and then putting it through environmental review where that environmental review is really not going to lead to a better result. And so the question I have is just around why are we doing that? What is the point of that activity? What is the public benefit that comes from that? And I'm not sure we have a great answer to that question. And so if we don't, we should be thinking about reducing the amount of time.
Other questions? You can raise your hand. Yeah. Sure.
Hi. Hello. So I loved hearing all of the discussion about the need for more investment in mitigation, reducing the risk up front. Given the scale of that need, I assume we're not going to turn around tomorrow and provide enough funding to put, every project on the ground that we want right away. So I'm curious if you all have any thoughts or have seen best practices and how you prioritize, with whatever funding you do have, how do you think about where to put that first, how to make that work so you don't do half of, you don't do a half project that gives you no benefit, but you also spread around appropriately, tackle the highest risk, whatever that may be.
I can start. I think it's imperative that we recenter and refocus on community collaboratives and working with state foresters and governors to come up with the highest priority areas. Oftentimes, I'll just take the Forest Service, for example, that a lot of these projects are funded in a silo or they're prioritized in a silo, not in collaboration with other partners. So think about how we might move that forward in the future to creating the greatest good for the biggest benefit, I believe, is getting your communities engaged and supporting these projects. Because if we don't have local rural communities in support of these projects, they're going to continue to get litigated. And we don't want to continue to waste scarce resources. So let's think about how we can encourage community and collaboratives, how we can get the governors and state foresters involved to actually say, this is our top tier, middle tier, lower tier projects, and then it's funded collaboratively through the federal, state, and local government and local communities.
I would add to that this is a problem of multiple scales. So, at the federal level, things like the Wildland Fire Intelligence Center that's inside of the Fix Our Forest Act, or FOFA, is one way to start to provide better, more comprehensive data to folks on the ground to start to, one, make decisions during suppression, but also make decisions about prioritization of mitigation projects, and even to support our recovery. So at the federal level, that kind of information is pretty useful. Then you have to sort of look at the state level and what can states do, and are states setting themselves up to prioritize mitigation on the landscape and in communities, and how are they doing that? And so in places like Washington, you've got tools like the Quantitative Wildfire Risk Assessment, I think, QWRA tool, and that sort of helps look across the landscape to identify what watersheds can benefit from fire, where you have watersheds that fire would put a lot of values at risk, right? And then at the local level, you have to make those decisions as well, because things like codes and ordinances, how we build, where we build, those are local decisions fundamentally, but they need to be empowered by the best data that we have available at scales. And so you've really got, sort of a multi-scalar issue of data and information that's necessary to make those mitigation prioritization decisions. And ideally, all those things talk to each other. And that's where we've struggled perhaps the most. But I think it's one of the areas that's maybe the most exciting with all of the conversation right now around technology and modernization of that data infrastructure that helps us do the work we need to do in a better and more effective way.
I think it's such an important question. And I wanted to highlight a fact that I think illustrates this problem. So in California, utilities are one of the greatest reasons, or the greatest ignition sources. And they face basically strict liability under inverse condemnation when they start a fire. As a result, they are investing absolutely insane amounts of money in reducing the ignition sources and cutting vegetation along all of their utility lines or undergrounding it. When you compare the amount that they are spending versus what the state is spending, which is an enormous amount of money, the utilities are spending more, but they are directing that money solely on reducing their ignition risk as opposed to reducing wildfire risk writ large. And so we are allocating our scarce funding towards reducing their liability as opposed to the public benefit. And so I just want to highlight that as a place where I think we need to be thinking about how to get at prioritization, but also highlighting the fact that we're operating under these many different silos that have really different risk profiles and incentives. And so it's a really tricky problem to figure out. The place that I see a lot of success happening in California right now is there was a bill that was passed at the state legislature 2 years ago that required the creation of pods, planned operational potential operational delineations that essentially look at across the landscape, where would we box in a wildfire? Where, if we were going to look to fire regimes more holistically, where would it make sense to stop those? And then to really be investing our risk in shoring up those pods. And so that, rather than having a landowner say, I'm going to do this project on my landscape because I want to, or because I have the funding or whatever, we are looking holistically across a fire shed to actually figure that out. So I think that kind of coordination is a potential way.
And I would just add that kind of goes back to what Kelly started with. Those pods become incredibly effective when you have local collaboration, identifying what they value. In parts of North Central Washington, the Okanagan area is a great example where you have a lot of rangeland and grassland, and a lot of value is placed on fence line. That's incredibly important to the lives and livelihoods of those people who work that land. And it's also not often incorporated in our evaluation of values at risk. But when you have local collaborations, like Kelly mentioned, that can participate in the pods process that Sara mentioned, you start to layer these things in a way that puts local voices in the room to identify where the mitigation needs to be prioritized for the values at risk in that place.
Great. I think we can take one or two more. Yeah, in the back.
Thank you all today for your work and your presentation. I wanted to ask, how do you envision integrating FireSat's technology and your practices into existing federal framework and foster a better culture and a more supportive transition? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I can address that. So one of the things that we're doing with FireSat is we currently have an early adopters program where we have folks from federal agencies, we have around the world, local communities, local fire departments, that are getting a look at our first data and starting to learn how to work with it. And then immediately we take feedback about how that data worked, what didn't work, and we help refine and redefine what we're doing so we can really easily integrate with existing systems. So I hope that helps.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this data and information is open source and available to the public without charge.
Correct. Our goal is to get all our data free to first responders for real-time fire response. And then also our goal is to get data free out to the scientists and the fire modeling communities as well. We're trying to do what we can to reduce barriers.
One of the things that I'm particularly excited about is a lot of the risk that we see in prescribed fire is like after you kind of close down the fire, you think it's, you know, all been extinguished, but actually you have a burning stump or something like that. We were talking at lunch about the potential for this kind of remote sensing to sort of serve as eyes on the ground through the end of the kind of suppression system. So I just wanted to highlight that as a potential real world example.
And we'll take ahead one more question in the front here.
Yes, Ken Fielding with Storm Center Communications. We're actually a NASA satellite software technology that responded to the California wildfires through NASA and NOAA data. But Dr. Falkowski, you mentioned something that resonated with me when you mentioned that 1 in 6 people live in wildfire risk zones and that technology adoption is very slow to respond to this crisis and this problem. So what is your vision for a technology adoption path that would sort of close that gap? And what opportunities do you see for technology serving as a tool that will bring all agencies, all stakeholders together to respond to predictive planning and active fire events?
Yeah, so one of the things that I observed when I was at NASA was, you know, we developed these excellent technologies for understanding the Earth through satellite data, for example. But oftentimes, for whatever reason, the folks that are doing the land management and the firefighting are either not aware of the data sets, they're not aware that the data exists, or their systems are not set up to use the data. There might be something just a little bit wrong with the data formats or something that makes it not easy to integrate into use. And so really what I see as a path going forward is really breaking down barriers and talking with each other to collaborate radically across these boundaries to predefine and co-develop, predefine the problem, codefine the problem, and then co-develop solutions. Start integrating the technologists and the data science folks with the practitioners and the fire managers from day one so they can work together and understand where those barriers might exist and then help work through those.
Great. Thank you all so much for the wonderful questions. I think I want to close out the Q&A with a final question for the panelists, rapid fire, no pun intended. Can you tell us a little bit about something that you think people commonly misunderstand or get wrong about the wildfire problem and how you might reframe it so that we can design solutions that help to build wildfire resilience? I'll go ahead and maybe start with you, Michael, at the other end there.
Yeah, I think you heard a lot of it in the talks today, but I think the general public in general sees fire as bad. You know, they get inundated by smoke. They see what happens in LA on the news. They watch movies like The Lost Bus, and they're just terrified of fire, and that's not the case. As you saw from all the great speakers today, Fire is good. It's inherently part of ecosystem function, and we need more fire on the landscape. We need beneficial fire.
I would say that I think as highlighted by the different parts of our talk, we have a problem of conflating what is happening in our wildland spaces with our urban spaces. And I think that like some of the push that like especially the forestry part of Fix Our Forest Act was a solution to the LA fires leads to that confusion, right? As Annie and Kelly highlighted, urban conflagration really focused on home hardening and defensive space, whereas what I talked about, beneficial fire, is really talking about a different type of fire. And that nuance gets really flattened when we have public relations communications, but I think for all of us as advocates, policymakers, et cetera, we have to really pull these things apart and understand that we're talking about things at different scale and in different ways.
I think maybe the one frustration, my sort of frustration of the day alternates, but currently it is the idea that there is a single solution to this problem, that we can do if we just did this one thing, and you can insert whatever the current thing of the day is. If we just did this one thing, all of our wildfire issues would be solved magically. And that is just simply not the case. This is a wicked problem in the truest sense of the word, where we have to be tackling this at multiple levels, local, state, and national, from multiple different angles. And we need to be making space for our neighbors and friends and coworkers and colleagues and other sectors to work together on solutions that are more holistic and cross-cutting. And so, like, if you ever hear anyone saying, I've got the solution, hear my voice and say, yes, and tell me your thing, and keep listening for the next thing, because it's going to take more than one thing.
How about not all trees are good and not all fires are bad? Okay? It took us 150 years to get here. It's going to take us a long time to get out of this. I hope we can look at this as a long game. This is not solvable overnight. It's just going to take persistence and determination to really do the hard work. We have an opportunity to use a natural renewable resource for our rural communities in our states that are very vulnerable to catastrophic fires. So I would love to see opportunities for natural resources being utilized at a local rural level for jobs, for timber mills, for a renewable resource that makes our landscapes that more resilient, because we have reduced the stems per acre that we are currently living in actually a second growth post clear-cut logging from the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Well said. I'll turn it back to EESI to close us out.
Thank you, Jessica. If you ever have free time on a briefing day, you're always welcome to come back and help with Q&A. Thank you so much. I think Jessica and the rest of our panelists deserve a nice round of applause. Thank you so much. I've said this a bunch of times, but I really mean it. Thanks to Jessica and Hannah, who's not with us today because we had to reschedule, and so she's out west. But Hannah and Jessica, thank you, and everyone else at the Federation of American Scientists Guild for joining us today. This briefing could not have been possible without you all. This is the second time we cooperated on a briefing in the last 12 months. We did a briefing on extreme heat last summer that was on fire, and it was a really good one. If you want to learn about extreme heat, unfortunately, we're probably going to have some extreme heat again this year. That briefing, I think, is still extremely relevant. I'd also like to thank Senator Padilla and his great staff for helping us with the room today, and hopefully we'll have a chance to see him stop by the reception a little bit later. I'd also like to thank my ESI colleagues who did all the work today, Dan O, as well as Omri, Allison, Hannah, Nicole, and Laura, and Miguel. We are hanging around. Look for our pins if you want to learn more about EESI or if you have questions about our resources, but thanks to them for all of their work. We also have two great interns this semester, Asta, who helped us with timekeeping today, and Andy, who probably was doing something with social media. She was staring into a laptop screen, but I assume Andy was working. Andy and Asta, thanks so much for all your help today. We also couldn't do this without Troy and Lauren, so thanks for joining us. They're our videographers and help us get out to the world as well, so thanks as always. We have a lot of great resources coming up. I mentioned the podcast we did with Genevieve Biggs with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. That just dropped last week. Definitely, if you want to learn more about how philanthropy is helping a lot of these efforts, that's a great resource, and I encourage you to check that out. If you do, and you want to rate, review, and subscribe, that would be great too. If you don't like the podcast, don't rate, review, or subscribe. Or you can still subscribe, but don't rate or review. But if you liked it, please let us know. We could really use that. We have a briefing next week, next Thursday, over on the House side about energy efficiency and utility bills and how energy efficiency can be used to lower utility bills. We also have resources coming up on water infrastructure, climate and weather data availability, and even more. We also just published a save the date for June 24th. That is the date for the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Expo Policy Forum and Reception. If you can join us, that is a day-long extravaganza of multiple panels, experts and practitioners and leaders from across the clean energy sector. Last year, we had hundreds and hundreds of people come by over the course of the day. It's a great time, and it's a great opportunity to learn all about where things stand in the clean energy sector. The best way to keep up with everything we do at EESI is to subscribe to our biweekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions, and you can do that at eesi.org. And lastly, there's the slide again with our briefing, with our survey. If you liked what you heard today, if you have comments, ideas, suggestions, if you were in our live cast audience, and I'm sorry we didn't get to the questions, we just had too many questions here in the room. But if you have a moment or two to share your thoughts with us on our survey, that would be great. Because we really read every response and it helps us quite a lot. So with that, we will wrap up. We are going to be transitioning this room into a party zone. So there will be a disco ball and the lights it'll get a little blue. But hopefully you'll have a moment to stick with us and get a chance to network with each other and our panelists. But thank you so much. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. And I think today is probably going to be the last of the winter weather around here for a while. So that'll be nice. And hopefully we'll have some time before we have to start dealing with wildfire season. But thank you all so much and have a great afternoon. Thanks.